So I'm going to show you how to use Jenkins to automate the build, package and deployment of a Kubernetes application built in Spring Boot. So I've got my microservice application consisting of two very simple microservices, MSHW, which stands for Microservice Hello World. If I want to rebuild this, I need to run Maven install to rebuild the jar. Then I need to build Docker images from the jar. And in the last video, we looked at HELM, where we could use HELM to, in just one single command, install it into Kubernetes. So that's quite convenient, but it's still a few steps. So that's where Jenkins comes in. So Jenkins is an open source automation server primarily used for continuous integration and continuous delivery in software development. Jenkins uses plugins so it can integrate other tools such as Maven, Git or JUnit. It uses pipelines written in GroovyScript to enable us to define the different steps of our build process. Then we can run the pipelines in just one click. We can even automate things to happen when things change on the Git server, for example. So to install Jenkins, we need to go to jenkins.io. Now I'd recommend, there's various ways to install it. You can install it as a Docker image, or you can install it in a cloud, but I'd just recommend installing it directly on your operating system. So I'm using Windows here, so I would go to Windows and just it's automatically downloading the link there, so I'd just run that. But I've already got it installed, but there are some instructions for installing it also on this website. It's probably worth having a read through this because there's a few steps for installing. Specifically when you log in for the first, you have to choose a port because it's a web-based interface. So you run it as a server and access it on a port. And also there's an administrator password that you can copy from the installation directory. All the information for doing that is here. So you have in the program files, there's a folder called secrets. In program files, Jenkins secrets, there's an initial admin password. You just need to copy that so you can log in when you first log into Jenkins. Other than that, the installation is pretty straightforward, and Jenkins is really reliable software, so it should work without any problems. It will guide you through the login process and setting up a user. Just accept all the default options if there are any options. And once it's installed, like I said, it's a web server, so you should be able to visit it on localhost and then the port that you chose during installation. And here is the Jenkins front end. So we're going to create a job to build our project and deploy it. To do this, we can use a GroovyScript, and we can define this on our Git server, so we can define it as part of the source code of our application. So I'm going to go into my project. I'm going to define a script and call it Jenkinsfile. That's with a capital J and a small f. So in our Jenkins file, we're going to define the steps that we want to run through to deploy our project. Now for now, I'm just going to define two stages, and they're just example stages that are just going to echo stage 1 and stage 2 to the console. But this is the GroovyScript format we're going to use. So we define a pipeline, agent any, and then we define stages. So we have stage 1. The steps on stage 1 are to run a script which echoes stage 1, and a similar thing for stage 2. So I'm just going to save that and commit it to Git. We'll be building up this Jenkins file as we go along, so I'm just going to say initial Jenkins file. And that's committed to Git. Now back into Jenkins, we're going to configure a job to download all our source code from Git, including the Jenkins file, and then run the Jenkins file. Depending on how we're using Git, we may want to go manage Jenkins credentials, and I have some Git credentials defined here, but we could add new credentials and define our credentials for Git here. So we've got the usual stuff: username and password, SSH with private key, secret file, GitHub app. So if you're using GitHub, you can select that. We've set up our credentials, but mine are already set up. We're going to need to define some credentials in our Git part of our pipeline. That is unless you're using a Git public server. Okay, so I'm going to create the job now. I'm going to call it MSHW, and it's a pipeline type. There's different types you can use there. Click on OK and give it a simple description. So MS build and deploy. The pipeline definition, I'm not going to select any of that up there. The pipeline definition is pipeline script from source code management. So we could have a pipeline script that we define in here, but to make it more dynamic, I'm going to say pipeline script from source code management. So that is the Jenkins file is going to come from, it's checked into Git and it's going to come from there. Script path, that is the path of the Jenkins file. So it's in MSHW HELM project. So I'm going to say MSHW HELM / Jenkins file. Source code management type is Git. The repository URL, it could be GitHub or whatever Git server you're using, but that is the URL of the Git server that I'm using. Credentials, that was the Git credentials that we set up in the previous step. And that's it. So I can save that, and then if I go to the main dashboard view, I can see we now have one job, MSHW, and I can click play to run that job. If I then click on that, we can see it's ticked. It says last build 4.5 seconds ago, so it was successful. I can see the build history here. Click on that and see console output, and we can see stage 1 and stage 2 were echoed to the console. So that job has run successfully. So now what I need to do is modify my Jenkins file to do the different stages of the deployment. The stages are going to be build, where I'm going to do Maven install, and then package, where I'm going to build the Docker images, and then deploy, where I'm going to HELM install my Helm chart into Kubernetes. So for step 1, we need to use Maven. Now I'm going to go back to Jenkins and manage Jenkins and select tools. And here in this section we can add different tools we may want to use. Now we don't need a JDK to do the build. We've got Git here, Gradle, Ant, and Maven. Now we need to click on add Maven and select the Maven version. Now we're using Maven 398, and then Jenkins will automatically install Maven from Apache. So that's very simple to set up, but we'll use that. So we're going to use Maven 398. So I'll just save that, and then I'm going to define my build phase in my Jenkins file. Say stages build. Now because we're using Maven 398, I need to add a tool section here which says we're using Maven 398, and the build section is going to have the following steps. So it's going to build the MSHW project. We're going to define a batch there where we cd into MSHW and do a Maven clean install. And it's also going to build the MSHW caps project. So it's going to cd into MSHW caps and do a Maven clean install on there. Now if I save my Jenkins file, commit it, and push it to the remote server. Now we go back to Jenkins and run MSHW again. It will check everything out again, including the Jenkins file. And now if we look at the job as it's happening, we should see it's now doing Maven installs. So it's running our JUnit test. If the JUnit test fails, the whole thing will fail, so we won't deploy a failed code. So it's running through the 2 different Maven installs, and we have success. It's also run stage 2 because that's still in the Jenkins file. So that's the build step done. And now let's look at the package step. So for the package step, that's going to be step 2. That's going to look like this. So again, we can do echo building MSHW image, then bat and 3 quotes, and then this is the batch file to build the image. So we're going to cd into MSHW, docker build, and then tag it so that it can be uploaded to Docker Hub. And we're going to do the same for MSHW caps, cd into the project, docker build MSHW caps image, and then tag it. So now I can save my Jenkins file. Obviously I'm making it look easy. You have to work out how to do these steps, but the good thing about Jenkins is once you've got it working, it kind of keeps working. So I'm going to commit the Jenkins file, added package section to Jenkins file, commit and push that, and then go back to Jenkins, back to the dashboard, and run the job again. Click on the job. This is the build history part and console output. Now it's running the Maven installs and running the unit tests. Once that's done, it should, I think now it's doing the Docker build, finish success. So let's have a look in Docker. So I'll go to my terminal. I say Docker images, and we can see that MSHW and MSHW caps and the tagged versions were all built 21 and 23 seconds ago. So that has worked. So now all we need to do is the final stage, the deployment stage, and we'll use HELM for that. Now I actually installed HELM into a custom location, so I have to add it to the build path of Jenkins. And if you do that, you can go to Manage Jenkins, System, and Environment Variables. I've added, say, path plus extra, and I've added the value of added the folder of when HELM is installed to Jenkins there, so it's in the build path, so I can just call HELM in the scripts and it will know, it will find it in that folder. Another thing I need to do for Kubernetes is configure more credentials. Now I've already got them configured, but we go Manage Jenkins, Credentials, and then we'd add more. I just do global credentials. I'm the only one that uses this version of Jenkins, and we would choose a secret file. ID, I've called it kubeconfig, and then choose file, and that we need to give it the file from our home folder .kube and config, and then save that as our credentials. So that is our credentials for using Kubernetes. I've already got that done though, so I'll go straight and do the deployment part of our Jenkins file. So for my deploy section, we're going to say the steps are with the credentials file kubeconfig. We're going to echo deploying and then run the script cd mshw helm, which is the project in Git where the Helm chart is installed. Then we'll do helm status mshw to see if it's installed. It is installed now. If it's not installed, we're going to do installing mshw and helm install. And if it is installed, we'll do helm upgrade. But to demonstrate this, I'm going to delete the project now. Helm delete mshw. And I'm going to check in my Jenkins file with the deploy stage defined. Then back to Jenkins, I'm going to run it again, and then we'll have a look at what's happening. So it's running the tests. It's doing the Maven install. It's running the tests of the second microservice. Doing the Maven install. Now it's building the Docker images. And now it's doing deploying. And we've got back that it's deployed and finished success. So if I look in my terminal now, helm list, we've got it deployed and it's just deployed there. And I can test my microservices by going to mshw.com. It's just starting up, so I'll just wait for it. So now everything is running, it should work. We're just waiting for Ingress now. And now it's working. mshw.com, read from the database. Secret will give us our secret value, and counter will continue counting up on the NFS server. So the application's completely working and it's deployed now by just clicking on go in Jenkins. Now Jenkins might seem like a pain, and sometimes it's difficult to, well, you have to work out how to get the different stages to work, but once you've got it working, that's it then. It's very reliable. It doesn't tend to go wrong. So once you've got the build process built, it's absolutely simple then to make changes to the project and then redeploy them. Obviously you can use Jenkins with other tools, for example npm if you're doing a front-end build. You can use Maven Gradle or just batch scripts, so you can automate any build process with Jenkins. And this has only been a very brief introduction to Jenkins. But if you go into the configuration of a project, you can configure build triggers. So you can, for example, build periodically, or you can do GitHub hook to trigger automatic polling. You can poll the SCM, and all the instructions for how to do things are all included in Jenkins there. And if we go into our project and look at stages, we can see the history of what we've done. So on build 1, we checked it out from Git and did stage 1 and stage 2. And these are the different histories of what we did. So we've also got a history of our build being saved there. So that's how to use Jenkins to automate building, packaging and deploying a Spring Boot application. So thanks for watching.